Hi there, students. I'm XS. That's little x, little s, which stands for extra sweet, because that's what I am. Before we begin today's lesson, I need to give you all a little bit of a warning. Today's lesson is going to get a bit tense. Yep, today we're going to be discussing Japanese tense. And actually, because I think tense is so important in Japanese, I'm splitting this lesson up into two parts. So be sure you like and subscribe so you'll be ready when the second half of this video drops next week too. I think I would actually consider myself to be a bit of a scholar when it comes to tense in Japanese. It's definitely one of those topics in Japanese grammar that I've always found so interesting, and so I keep coming back to it and learning more and learning more. Talking about time, discussing topics that occur over time, things that happen in the past, talking about events and plans that may or may not occur in the future, probabilistic linguistics, quantum language use, machine learning. Wait. No. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's bring it back. Sorry, I get all fangirly about this stuff. The point is that today we're going to be talking about the very basic fundamentals of Japanese tense. I'm excited about this, and I hope you are too. We're also going to spend some time today talking about kanji and the role that they play in Japanese verbs, because verbs do most of the work in a Japanese sentence when it comes to tense. So let's get into it. Ikimashou! Today, we're going to start with a very simple sentence, and we're going to play around with it a bit. The sentence we'll start with is Gakusei wa Nihongo o benkyou suru. Well, that's a lot of kanji, isn't it? Are you panicking right now? It's going to be okay. Let's break it down together. We're actually going to work left to right in this case. Usually, when I'm translating a sentence, I tend to start at the end, at the verb, but in this case I want to start with gakusei. This is the topic of our sentence. How do we know that? Because our particle wa follows immediately after it in the second slot of the sentence. You can kind of think about Japanese sentences that way, as having several slots that are predictable. Topic in slot 1, topic particle in slot 2, object in slot 3, object particle in slot 4, and so on until you get to the verb at the end. Verb always at the end, almost in every single case. Here, for this sentence, wa is marking gakusei as the most important aspect of our sentence. In this case, the doer, the performer of the verb. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. What does gakusei mean? So gakusei is a noun that means student, just like all of you. But actually, we can break gakusei down even further, can't we? Because the word gakusei is made up of two kanji. So what are they? This left part of gakusei means learn, study, or it can be used to talk about specific sciences. Here's the thing about learning kanji. Sometimes kanji can behave a little bit like puzzle pieces. If you're anything like me, that can make learning kanji super fun. But if you're not that into puzzles, then I guess learning kanji can be a bit of a pain. What do I mean? Well, this specific kanji has two entirely different pronunciations based on how it's going to be used. That tends to be the case for nearly all kanji, in fact. Most kanji will have a native Japanese reading, called kunyomi, and a reading that sometimes sounds reminiscent of the original Chinese pronunciation of the character, basically a Chinese reading called an onyomi. More often than not, if a kanji is appearing in its verbal form, it will be pronounced in the native Japanese reading, kunyomi, and if it's being used in a larger compound, like a noun in the case of the gaku in gakusei, it will be pronounced in the Chinese reading, onyomi. So we know that gaku will be pronounced gaku in the word gakusei, but this kanji on its own can also be used as a verb, meaning to learn. When it appears as a verb, it will be pronounced like mana in the verb manabu. Remember, you're never going to have a kanji sitting in the final position of any verb, the part that ends in an u sound. And that's because you're going to need to conjugate the end of any given verb. And you don't conjugate kanji. That sounds weird to say. That's why we often write out the pronunciation of kanji's kunyomi as kanji pronunciation dot hiragana. Only the part before the dot is that actual pronunciation for that kanji. Everything after the dot is the part of the verb that will be conjugated. So we see this in manabu. The mana is the part that's actually associated with the kanji. The bu is not associated with that kanji because that's the part that will conjugate. Now, let's quickly look at the other half of gakusei. The se in gakusei can be pronounced se or sho. Its onyomi, or Chinese reading, can change depending on what words it might appear in. That's just a feature of sound change in Japanese. Of course, in the case of gakusei, it's appearing as se, so not difficult, right? Well, this kanji can also be used as a verb, so let's see what kind of kunyomi it might have. Oh, crap. Well, hey, listen, I did tell you that this lesson was going to get tense. Sometimes kanji readings can get a bit out of hand. This kanji has a ton of readings because it can be used to mean a lot of different things. This kanji can mean anything from being born, to being genuine, to even words that are related to referring to oneself. The takeaway point here is that kanji can have many different pronunciations that change based on where they appear in a sentence and what words they appear with. Actually, this is even more evident in the object of our sentence. The object of any Japanese sentence will get marked with the particle o, and we've talked about that before, so we already know this. So, what's marked with o in this sentence? Nihongo. Nihongo means the Japanese language. You can actually use the go from Nihongo to form lots of different languages. In this case, it's the country name for Japan, Nihon, plus go to form the Japanese language. But let's check off that go for a moment and look specifically at Nihon. Nihon is made from two kanji as well. Are we noticing a pattern? Two kanji put together to form a word? Okay, this kanji means day or the sun. It obviously means either of those things because, the sun is out during the day. And here's the other half of Nihon, a kanji meaning true, real, book, counters for long objects, and origin. I often have students who are just beginning their Japanese studies ask me why the word for Japan, Nihon, has a book in it. It doesn't. Nihon means the origin of the sun. So called because Japan got to see the sun before China when their two cultures were first interacting with one another. I'm introducing to you this concept of kanji as puzzle pieces because, as we've talked about before, Chinese characters don't actually handle change all that well. So when kanji were introduced into the Japanese culture in about the 5th century, they needed to be forced to be more malleable than had originally been intended. That's going to become even more important as we continue to talk about conjugation today and on into the future. But before we move on to conjugation, let's go back to our sentence again. Here it is. We've identified the topic of our sentence, gakusei, students, and the object of our sentence, Nihongo, the Japanese language, but what's the verb in this sentence? Benkyou suru. A lot of Japanese nouns can be converted into verbs by adding suru, to do, to the end. Benkyou is exactly that kind of noun. Benkyou is a noun that means study or studies. And so therefore, when you add suru to the end of benkyou, you end up with benkyou suru, meaning to study. I'll again give you the breakdown by kanji. This kanji is pronounced tsutomeru if it's being used as a verb. Although I just want to mention that this is a rare usage of this kanji because there's another more common usage of a kanji for tsutomeru. But more often than not, this kanji is going to be pronounced ben, the onyomi for this kanji, as we see in benkyou. Anyway, alone, this kanji carries the meaning of to strive for, to endeavor, to work hard at something. Okay, makes sense so far. Working hard at studying, I get that. All right, then the other half of the kanji means something like strength or potency. Push these together and you get benkyou, to study, to make an effort toward getting stronger? That sounds more like workout to me, but I don't know. Kanji just aren't always very nice to us, and sometimes we really have to stretch our imaginations to comprehend why they are the way they are. Anyway, ben plus kyo equals benkyou, and that means to study, and we just have to remember that. But by now, we should have a really great understanding of our core sentence that we originally started with, right? Gakusei wa Nihongo o benkyou suru. The student studies Japanese. Gakusei, student. Nihongo, Japanese language. Benkyou suru, to study. The student studies Japanese. Wow. Okay, well, we sure did a lot of work just so that we could get here, didn't we? But yeah, now we understand our sentence. this is where the fun begins. Or maybe not. Maybe you dislike grammar and grammatical conjugations. I don't know. Me personally, I enjoy this stuff a lot. So for me, this is where the fun begins. So today we're going to take our simple sentence, gakusei wa nihongo o benkyou suru, and we're going to use it to create 4 different conjugations. Currently, as it exists now, we have the plain present tense form. Let's start by changing that to what is sometimes called the polite present tense form, which is also known as the mas form. For suru, and any suru verb, that's any noun plus suru, to form the mas form, we're going to drop the du, and then we're going to change the leftover vowel sound in su to an e sound. So we're going to go suru minus ru, and we're left with su, and then we're going to change su to shi. And then we're going to add mas to that shi sound, and boom, we formed shimasu. So we now have the mas form of suru, and that's good because the mas form is going to come in handy in a variety of situations. For today, though, let's just call it the polite present and be done with it. So here was our original sentence, gakusei wa nihongo o benkyou suru. And now we have gakusei wa nihongo o benkyou shimasu. So what does polite mean in this case? Well, I'm going to do a whole lesson soon on teinego, polite language in Japanese. But for our purposes today, let's just say that the mas form is the form that you would use with people who are in positions of respect, like teachers, co-workers in places of authority, strangers, anything like that. Now, let's take our sentence and we're going to change it again. Let's take the plain form and convert it into the plain past tense form. So we want to go from the student studies Japanese, and we're going to go to the student studied Japanese. And just like English, all we have to do is change the verb. That's it. If we change the verb, then we have changed the entire sentence. So our verb starts as suru. Here it is. And to convert suru to a plain past tense verb, we need to drop the do, just like we did with the mas form, and change su to shi, just like we did with the mas form. And then we add ta, which denotes completion. So suru minus ru equals su. Su becomes shi. Shi plus ta equals shita. And that's it. It's really that easy. We've now formed the past tense plain form of suru, shita. And now we can make our new sentence, gakusei wa nihongo o benkyou shita. Well, actually, forming the polite form of this same sentence is really almost just as easy as that. So we take suru, we drop ru, and that gives us su. We take su, convert it to shi, and then we take shi and we add mashita. We can create the polite past form of suru simply by adding mashita to our base instead of adding ta as we did before. And so just like that, we're able to make yet another conjugation for our original sentence. Gakusei wa nihongo o benkyou shimashita. Here are all 4 of those conjugations for suru seen together. Suru, to do, plain present. Shimasu, to do, polite present. Shita, to do, plain past. And shimashita, to do, polite past. Before we move on, though, I actually want to rewind the tape a little bit. And then we add ta, which denotes completion. Why did I say completion and not past tense? Japanese tense is a little bit weird. First of all, I've taught you today present tense and past tense, but I didn't mention anything about future tense. That's because Japanese doesn't really have a future tense. Can you talk about the future in Japanese? Yes, of course. It's mirai, by the way. Can you talk about plans you might hope to accomplish in the future? Yes, of course. You can use constructions like tsumori for that. But there's no specific conjugation needed for verbs to discuss future actions. Instead, you'll get information about things that haven't happened yet out of context clues. I've heard it said sometimes that this is because Japanese doesn't really like to talk about concrete things that haven't happened yet, and even I once had a teacher in Japan claim that Japanese doesn't have a future tense because of Miyamoto Musashi's Book of the Five Rings, which talks about keeping death in mind at all times, And since you never know if you're going to be alive tomorrow, you can't talk about future verbs in Japanese. With all due respect to that teacher, nah, I strongly disagree. I think it's just far more likely that a grammatical future tense just wasn't really needed and never formed in Japanese. Future tense is actually rare in languages across the world anyway. But what do I know? Honestly, I'm just a puppy. More important to my current point, though, is that I specifically said that past tense in Japanese is really the completed tense. What I mean by that is that Japanese cares less about when things are located in time and more about whether or not an action has been started and then completed. Even when we talk about the present tense forms of verbs like suru, they actually have more to do with English indefinite forms like I do something regularly than they do with progressive forms like I am doing something. In fact, there's a whole other grammar pattern to form the progressive form of a verb, which is the te iru grammar pattern. I'll talk more about te iru in a future video, but if you're very interested in knowing how to form progressive verb forms in Japanese, I did a grammar drop recently on that very subject. Link in the description. So, the good news is that we've made all 4 of our conjugations. So we have suru, shimasu, shita, and shimashita. And even more good news is that when it comes to Japanese tense, that's pretty much it, right? Japanese really just has present and past, quote unquote, completed tense to worry about. So you never have to worry about future. It's really just these 2 tenses. So that's good news. The bad news is that suru is an irregular verb, which means that we're going to have to learn how to do this same thing to change something from suru to shimasu to shita to shimashita. We're going to have to learn that for ichidan verbs, for godan verbs, and for kuru, which is our other irregular verb. And since we've already done a lot today, why don't we save these additional conjugations for the next lesson, okay? Want to do a quick quiz before we wrap up for the day? Okay, students, so quiz time, yeah? Let's work on some kanji, okay? I taught you several words today, and I showed you how we can break down the independent words into the kanji that make them up. Let's review the words that we learned today. Here's a word that we learned today. It means the Japanese language. Do you remember how to pronounce it? Oh, wait, hang on, I'm getting a text message. Seems like somebody broke a window by Manager Sama's desk? That's weird. Anyway, did you get it? Nihongo. Remember, the go part means language, and you can add it to country names or a few other situations, and that can form a language. The Nihon part, of course, means Japan, and that means sun and origin. Do you remember this one? I hope so. This word means student. How do you say it? Gakusei. Good. This word contains 2 kanji, one meaning study or sciences, and the other meaning life, birth, to be born, living, coming to be, and a bunch of other stuff too. One more kanji identification problem, and then I'll ask you a different type of question. How do you pronounce this word meaning to study? Benkyou suru. Remember, benkyou on its own can be a noun, but like many nouns, when you tack suru at the end, you form a verb. Also, there are a lot of katakana words that can take suru to form new verbs. Hiking, tennis, check. Suru is really versatile, and it's very important to know how to use it, how to conjugate it, etc. Speaking of which, how do you form the past polite form of suru? Do you remember how to do it? It's the past tense form, and just like any other suru verb, this is the kind of thing that you're going to use with like people in positions of authority in the past tense. Okay? So how would you do it? Shimashita. Remember, drop the ru in suru, change su to shi, and then add mashita. Well, quick and easy quiz today. Not bad, right? I really hope you have a lovely day, okay? Go do something fun. I know I threw a lot of information at you today. You might be wondering why I structured today's lesson the way I did. In my opinion, the relationship between Japanese verbs and kanji is a fairly fascinating topic. But I think when we start to work within the boundaries of Japanese tense, it's really important to understand how kanji function as a fairly constant feature in Japanese verbs. It might seem like these two topics aren't all that similar, but the reality is that if we're talking about tense, then we have to be thinking about verbal conjugation. And when we're thinking about conjugation, then I think it's really important to address right from the start that kanji play this really interesting role within verbs that's made even more fascinating due to the way that Japanese has historically incorporated the Chinese writing system into what is today modern Japanese. Watch for my video next week and we'll talk more about conjugating ichidan verbs, godan verbs, and kuru as well. I think I need to go help Manager Sama clean up some glass or something, so, lead with love, everybody. I've been Excess. See you later. Mata ne!